When a man truly lets himself get emotionally attached, something shifts, and not in the loud movie scene kind of way. It's quiet, subtle, almost invisible if you're not looking closely. He starts showing up differently. His guard, the one he's kept up for years, doesn't just lower, it disappears in certain moments. You see it when he listens to you like every word matters, when he remembers things you didn't think he noticed, when his patience stretches a little longer than it used to. But emotional attachment also makes him vulnerable in ways he's not used to. His fears feel louder, his trust feels riskier, and if he's been hurt before, that connection becomes both his safe place and the thing he's most afraid to lose. This is the space where love deepens, but it's also where the smallest misstep can leave the deepest mark. Emotional attachment isn't just a feeling. It's a shift in how someone shows up in a relationship. For a lot of men, it doesn't happen quickly. It's built quietly over time through trust, safety, and moments that mean more than they say out loud. But when it does happen, the changes are real. They're not always dramatic, but they're deep. You start to see it in the way he invests himself, in the way he listens, in the way he lets you see parts of him that no one else gets to see. And while that kind of connection can be beautiful, it can also be confusing for both people. Because along with the closeness comes vulnerability, and with vulnerability comes risk. Understanding what actually changes when a man is emotionally attached can take a lot of the guesswork out of relationships and help you navigate them with more clarity and less doubt. When trust finally feels safe, it's not because someone convinced you with words. It's because their actions have shown you over and over that your heart won't be mishandled here. For a lot of men, trust isn't built in big dramatic moments. It's built in the quiet consistency of how they're treated. It's in how you respond when they open up about something small. It's in how you handle their mistakes without humiliating them. It's in the way you hold space for them when they're not at their best. Little by little, that steady proof tells them, you can exhale here. You can show more of yourself here. And that's when everything changes. Because for many men, letting someone in means lowering a guard they've kept up for years, sometimes since childhood. That guard wasn't built out of stubbornness. It was built out of necessity. Maybe they've had people use their vulnerability against them. Maybe they've had love feel conditional, safe one day and gone the next. So trust becomes something they ration. They give pieces, not the whole. They keep the most tender parts locked away because it feels easier to live guarded than to live hurt. But when they start to feel that the ground beneath them won't shift, that the connection won't be pulled out from under them without warning, something inside begins to relax. That's the shift you'll notice. And it's subtle at first. They start sharing more about their day, not just the headlines, but the small details. They let you see frustration before it's polished into a neutral tone. They reach for you without thinking, not just when they want something, but because being near you feels natural. And when conflict comes, they don't immediately shut down or retreat. They stay in the conversation a little longer because they believe it's safe to do so. The truth is, safety and trust changes how someone shows love. A man who trusts deeply doesn't just give you more words. He gives you more of himself, more patience, more effort, more of the quiet gestures that say, I'm here, without having to announce it. And in turn, that kind of trust makes it easier for him to receive love without suspicion, to believe that affection isn't temporary or conditional. But here's the part that often goes unnoticed. When trust feels safe, it also creates space for imperfections. He doesn't have to perform to keep you. He doesn't feel like every mistake risks the relationship. And that freedom, the freedom to be real without losing connection, is what makes emotional attachment take root. It's not about making him feel bulletproof. It's about making him feel like he can be fully seen and still fully wanted. When that happens, it's no longer just about what he gives you, but about what you build together. Trust stops being something he guards and starts being something he invests in. And that's when a relationship moves from fragile to steady, from careful to committed, not because there's no risk, but because the safety between you outweighs the fear. When a man is truly all in, it doesn't always look the way movies or social media tell you it should. It's not constant grand gestures or dramatic declarations. More often, it's quiet. It's the subtle, consistent ways he starts weaving you into the fabric of his everyday life. He makes room for you, not just in his schedule, but in his priorities. He remembers the small things you say in passing and circles back to them weeks later. He checks in, not because he feels obligated, but because your well-being is on his mind when you're not around. And the thing is, these signs can be easy to overlook if you're only looking for the loud ones. For many men, showing they're committed isn't about volume, it's about presence. He's there when you need him, And even more importantly, he's there when you don't. He notices when something's off, even if you haven't said a word. And instead of demanding an explanation, he gives you the space or support you need without making it about him. He finds ways to protect your peace, whether it's taking care of a small task so you don't have to, or quietly adjusting his own habits to make life easier for you. These aren't moves made to win you over. They're moves that happen naturally when he's invested. One of the quietest ways a man shows he's all in is by letting you see him in the in-between moments. The times when he's tired, distracted, or just existing without trying to impress you. It's in those unfiltered spaces that trust deepens, because he's not curating his presence anymore. He's letting you see him as he really is. That's not just comfort, that's commitment. It means he believes your connection is strong enough to hold even when the shine of romance takes a back seat to the reality of daily life. He'll also start making decisions with you in mind, even when you're not in the room. Maybe it's choosing plans that include you without having to ask if you want to come. Maybe it's saying no to something because it would cost him time or energy he wants to save for you. It's not about giving up his independence. It's about understanding that his life is better with you in it and making choices that protect and grow that connection. And while words matter, you'll find that his "I love you" isn't just spoken, it's lived. It's in how he follows through on what he says. It's in how he treats you the same when you disagree as when everything's easy. It's in the way he doesn't just show up for the big moments, but for the ordinary ones that make up most of life. Because being all in isn't about occasional bursts of effort, it's about steady, reliable presence over time. When a man reaches that place, you can feel it, not in a rush of intensity, but in the quiet certainty that you matter to him in ways that don't need constant proof. It's a grounded kind of love, one that doesn't shout to be seen because it's busy being lived. And in a world full of noise, that kind of quiet is its own kind of loud. For a lot of people, love feels exciting. Vulnerability feels terrifying. Love can be a choice you make to show care, to give attention, to invest in someone's life. But vulnerability means letting them see the parts of you that you usually protect. It means opening the door to your insecurities, your fears, your failures, and trusting that they won't use them against you. And that's where the risk feels heavier. Because if love doesn't work out, you can grieve the loss of the connection. But if vulnerability is betrayed, you're left feeling exposed, foolish, and unsafe in a way that's hard to come back from. For many men, this fear runs deep. They've been taught to measure their worth in strength, control, and independence. Vulnerability can feel like breaking an unspoken rule. One that says, don't let anyone see your weakness because they might not respect you after. And so they build walls. Not because they don't care, but because they believe it's safer to love from behind a guard than to risk being fully known and hurt. The irony is that real intimacy can't grow without that openness, but it's hard to take that step when the cost of betrayal feels greater than the reward of connection. Vulnerability is risky because it takes trust out of theory and puts it into action. It's easy to say, I trust you, when nothing has been tested. But showing someone your unpolished truth, the habits you're not proud of, the doubts you carry, the moments you don't have it all together, that's where trust is proven. And the moment you cross that line, you give them the ability to hurt you in ways no one else can. That's why it often feels scarier than love itself. Love is an open hand. Vulnerability is handing over the key. You'll know someone is wrestling with this when you see hesitation in the deeper conversations. They might deflect with humor, change the subject, or keep the focus on you instead of themselves. It's not that they're unwilling to connect. It's that they're weighing the risk. And in their mind, the math has to add up by, will what I share be held with care, or will it come back to haunt me? When someone finally decides to be vulnerable, it's a huge act of courage. It's them saying, I'm going to give you this part of me and trust you with it. How you respond in that moment will either open the door wider or slam it shut. Even small reactions matter. A glance that feels dismissive, a comment that minimizes, or a tone that turns what they said into a joke. Those things might seem harmless, but to someone taking that risk, they can be proof that the wall needs to go back up. The truth is, vulnerability will always feel risky, because it is. But it's also the place where real connection lives. Love can exist without it, but it will stay surface level. Vulnerability is what gives love depth. It's what turns affection into intimacy and presence into partnership. And while that step may never feel completely safe, it's often the very thing that makes love worth holding on to. The moment a man lets you see the real him is rarely a big, dramatic reveal. It's usually small, almost unremarkable on the surface, but it carries more weight than most people realize. Maybe it's the first time he admits he doesn't have all the answers. Maybe it's when he shares a story from his past that he's never told anyone because it still stings when he thinks about it. Or maybe it's when you catch him in a quiet moment, unguarded, where he's not trying to be strong or charming, he's just being. That's the moment where the walls he spent years building start to come down, not because he decided to tear them down, but because you've shown him it might be safe to. For a lot of men, those walls were built out of necessity. They've been told, directly or indirectly, that the world values their strength, not their softness. That showing struggle makes them less respected. So they learn to keep certain parts of themselves hidden, the fear, the doubt, the hurt, even from people they care about. Letting someone in means risking the one thing they've been trying to protect all along, their sense of safety in who they are. And that's why it's such a big deal when they finally let that guard drop. You can often see it in how their language changes. They stop talking in bullet points and start telling you the story. They let silence sit between sentences because they're not just giving you the polished version anymore. There's no rush to cover up what they're feeling. There's no need to filter out the parts they think might make you see them differently. In that space, they're trusting that you won't judge them for the raw edges. The real him might surprise you. He might be more sensitive than you thought, or more unsure of himself in certain areas. He might have fears that seem out of place for someone so capable, or dreams he's been too embarrassed to say out loud. And while it's tempting to want to fix or reassure him in that moment, what often matters most is simply holding the space for him to be that version of himself without trying to change it. It's not about solving the vulnerability, it's about respecting it. Sometimes the moment is so subtle you almost miss it. He stays in the room when a difficult topic comes up instead of shutting it down. He tells you about a failure without downplaying it. He admits he's scared about something in the future. Those aren't signs of weakness, they're signs of trust. They mean he believes the relationship can hold what's real, not just what's easy. When a man reaches that point, it changes the connection, not because you suddenly know everything about him, but because he's decided you're someone who can be trusted with the things most people will never see. That's not just love, that's faith. And once he's taken that step, it's not something he gives lightly or takes back quickly. It's a doorway into a deeper kind of relationship, one that grows not from perfection, but from the courage to be fully seen. Past hurt has a way of leaving fingerprints on every new connection. Even when we think we've moved on, it's not always obvious. Sometimes it shows up in small hesitations, like the way someone pauses before answering a personal question, or the way they keep a certain part of their life separate. Other times, it's bigger, like avoiding deep commitment or pulling away the moment they feel too close. These aren't always conscious choices. They're learned responses, shaped by moments where trust was broken, where vulnerability was met with rejection, or where love felt more like a gamble than a guarantee. For many men, these patterns take root long before the relationship you're in now. Maybe it was a partner who used their openness against them, or a friend who betrayed a confidence, or even growing up in an environment where emotional needs were dismissed or met with criticism. Each of those moments plants a seed. If I open up, I get hurt. If I trust, I lose. Over time, those seeds grow into protective habits. They seem harmless on the surface, being independent, self-sufficient, or not the emotional type. But in reality, they're walls. The challenge is that these walls don't just keep pain out, they keep connection out too. A man who has been hurt before might still care deeply, but he'll manage that care from a distance. He'll keep conversations on safe topics. He'll focus on what he can do for you rather than what he can share with you, because giving is safer than revealing. He might even pull away when things are going well, not because he doesn't want closeness, but because closeness is the very thing that once cost him peace. You can often sense when past hurt is shaping the present. It's in the way he reacts more strongly to small misunderstandings, as if they confirm something he's already afraid of. It's in the way he tries to control outcomes, avoid conflict, or fix problems before they require emotional exposure. And while it's easy to take these reactions personally, most of the time, they're not about you. They're about history. You're simply standing in the place where old wounds are being re-triggered. The work here isn't to erase the past. It's to build enough safety in the present that the past doesn't have to lead the way. That takes patience, consistency, and a willingness to understand the story behind the reaction. Sometimes that means listening without defending yourself. Sometimes it means reassuring without overpromising. And sometimes it simply means not leaving when it would be easier to. When past hurt shapes present connection, love can feel like walking with a limp. You're still moving forward, but there's a part of you that remembers the injury every step of the way. Over time, with trust and care, that limp can fade. But it doesn't happen because someone tells you to get over it. It happens when new experiences slowly rewrite the old ones, when showing up with love becomes more familiar than bracing for pain. And when that shift happens, the connection stops being a reminder of what went wrong and starts being proof of what can go right. There's a difference between hearing someone and really listening to them. Hearing is catching the words. Listening is catching the meaning. It's noticing the tone behind the sentence, the pause before they answer, the way their eyes shift when they talk about certain things. When listening becomes more than hearing, you're not just taking in information. You're tuning into the person. You're paying attention to the things they're saying and the things they're not. And for a lot of men, that's the moment where connection deepens because it means they've moved from simply being present to being engaged in a way that costs them something: their attention, their patience, their presence in the moment. For someone who's guarded, listening deeply can be harder than it sounds. It's not about nodding along or waiting for a turn to respond. It's about setting aside the mental checklist, the problem-solving mode, the quick fixes, and just staying with what's being said. That takes effort, especially when what's being shared is emotional or uncomfortable. But the shift happens when he starts to realize that listening isn't just about gathering facts. It's about showing the other person they matter enough to be understood. When a man is really listening, you'll notice his follow-up isn't generic. He'll remember details you didn't think were important. He'll circle back to a conversation days later, not because you reminded him, but because it stayed with him. He'll ask questions that go beneath the surface, not to pry, but to understand. And the more he does this, the more you'll feel safe bringing him your real thoughts instead of just the filtered ones. Listening on this level also changes how disagreements happen. Instead of jumping to defend himself, he'll pause to actually hear your side, even if he doesn't agree with it right away. He'll be able to repeat back what you said in a way that makes you feel seen, not misrepresented. That doesn't mean there won't be conflict, but it does mean the conflict won't be about winning. It will be about understanding. This kind of listening builds trust in a way words can't. It tells you, without a single "I love you," that you matter enough for him to set aside his distractions and give you his full attention. It's not flashy. No one else might notice it, but in a relationship, it's one of the most powerful ways someone can show up. Because over time, when you feel truly heard, you stop holding back. You start sharing more openly without rehearsing or editing. And that's where real intimacy grows. For a lot of men, this isn't something they were taught. It's something they learn when the relationship becomes important enough to practice it. They realize that listening isn't passive. It's an active choice to lean in instead of check out. And once they understand the difference, they don't just hear your words. They carry them. They let them shape how they show up, how they respond, and how they love you in ways you can feel even in the silence. When a man has carried a guard for years, it doesn't drop all at once. It loosens in small, almost unnoticeable ways. If you're looking for a big, dramatic shift, you might miss it entirely. The signs are subtle: a little more eye contact when he's talking about something personal, a pause before he changes the subject, a willingness to linger in conversations that would have made him uncomfortable before. These aren't just quirks. They're quiet signals that he's starting to trust that this space and you are safe enough for him to let more of himself through. For a lot of men, that guard was built out of survival. Somewhere along the way, they learned that being too open was an invitation for pain. Maybe it was a partner who turned their honesty into ammunition, or a friend who broke a confidence, or years of being told to man up when what they really needed was understanding. That kind of history doesn't just vanish because someone new comes along. It takes time, not because they're testing you, but because they're retraining their own instincts to believe it's okay to be seen. You'll notice the shift in small changes. He starts answering questions with a little more detail, offering thoughts you didn't have to pull out of him. He shares a memory he hasn't told many people, not as a performance, but because it came to mind and he trusts you with it. He lets you see him in unpolished moments, not just when he's put together, but when he's tired, frustrated, or unsure. It's the kind of openness that doesn't come with an announcement, just a quiet, steady increase in what he's willing to let you in on. One of the biggest signs is that he stops rushing to change the subject when things get real. In the past, he might have thrown out a joke or redirected the conversation as soon as it got too close to something tender. But now, he lets the moment breathe. He sits in it with you, even if it's uncomfortable. That's not small. That's someone choosing connection over self-protection, even when their reflex is to pull away. You might also see his guard coming down in how he handles conflict. Instead of shutting down, walking away, or going silent for hours, he stays present. He might still need space. That's normal. But he circles back sooner with more willingness to talk. That's trust in action. It's him believing that even when there's tension, it's not a threat to the entire relationship. These shifts can feel so gentle that they're easy to overlook. But for him, they're not small at all. They're mile markers. Each one is proof that his belief in the safety of this connection is growing. And while it might be tempting to push for more, the truth is his pace matters. Every time you respond to his openness with care instead of criticism, you're helping that guard come down in a way that lasts. Because once he truly feels safe, the parts of himself he's been protecting won't just show up in moments. They'll start to live here. Closeness has a way of feeling like home and danger at the same time. On one hand, it's comforting to be seen, understood, and cared for in ways that make you feel you can finally exhale. On the other, it's terrifying to realize how much you now have to lose. When someone gets close enough to see the real you, they also get close enough to hurt you in ways no one else can. That's the paradox, the same doorway that lets love and also leaves you exposed. For many men, that push and pull is especially strong. Closeness requires letting go of control, and control is often how they've kept themselves safe. They might not even realize how much they rely on it. In managing their emotions, keeping their stories short, or steering conversations away from things that feel too raw. But when the connection deepens, those habits start to bump against the reality of intimacy. You can't stay guarded and truly close at the same time. And that's where the fear creeps in. The safety in closeness comes from knowing you're accepted as you are, that you don't have to perform or edit yourself to keep the other person around. It's in the comfort of someone who remembers your quirks, understands your silences, and stays when you're not at your best. That's the part that feels grounding. It tells you, I can rest here. But with that rest comes a subtle shift. Your emotional stakes rise. You find yourself depending on someone in ways you didn't before. And if you've been hurt in the past, depending on anyone can feel like walking back into a room you once got burned in. This is why closeness can trigger old defense systems. A man might start pulling back right when things are going well, not because he's losing interest, but because he's trying to manage the risk. The mind says, if I step back now, it won't hurt as much if this ends. It's not always conscious. Sometimes it's as small as becoming quieter, busier, or less responsive. Other times, it's bigger, avoiding conversations about the future or creating distance in moments when vulnerability would bring you closer. Recognizing this tension is key. The fear doesn't mean the closeness isn't real, and the comfort doesn't mean there's no risk. Both can exist at the same time. The work is in learning to live with that truth instead of letting one side cancel the other out. For someone carrying this fear, what helps most isn't pressure to be closer faster. It's steady reassurance that the connection can hold through the messy parts. Over time, when closeness is met with consistency instead of abandonment, the fear starts to loosen. It's not that the risk disappears, it's that the safety grows stronger than the fear. That's when closeness becomes less about what could go wrong and more about what's worth building. And in that balance, intimacy stops being a gamble and starts feeling like a shared commitment, one where both people know the risk, but choose the connection anyway. When a man starts to fear losing you, something in the way he moves through the relationship shifts. At first, you might not even notice it. It's not always about big, desperate gestures or sudden confessions. It's often quieter than that, subtle changes in how he shows up, in what he pays attention to, in the choices he makes when he thinks about the future. That fear isn't always dramatic, but it's powerful, and it can lead him in two very different directions toward deeper commitment and care, or toward control and anxiety. For a lot of men, the fear of loss doesn't come from nowhere. It's built over time, often from past experiences where they gave themselves to someone and ended up blindsided, abandoned, or replaced. Even if they've never said it out loud, those moments leave a mark. The thought of going through that kind of pain again, the late nights wondering what went wrong, the gut punch of realizing the person they trusted most isn't there anymore, it makes them hyper-aware of anything that could signal distance. So when they start to care deeply about you, that awareness turns into a quiet tension inside them. I don't want to lose this. I can't lose this. In its healthiest form, that fear becomes motivation. He starts investing more, not because he's afraid you'll leave, but because he values what you have and wants to protect it. He pays more attention to your needs. He's quicker to resolve conflict instead of letting it sit. He listens more carefully, remembers the little things you say, makes an effort to show appreciation. He's not trying to earn your love. He's trying to make sure you feel it. That's the good side of the fear. It wakes him up to the importance of not taking you for granted. But fear can also pull him in the other direction, and that's where it gets complicated. If he doesn't know how to handle it, that fear can make him more reactive, more controlling, or more insecure. He might start asking more questions about where you are, who you're with, or what you're thinking, not because he doesn't trust you as a person, but because his mind starts running through every possible threat to the relationship. He might interpret normal space as rejection or a change in tone as a sign you're pulling away. And without realizing it, he can start putting pressure on you to reassure him in ways that actually push you further back. This is the tricky thing about fear in relationships. It's not always expressed in ways that look like fear. Sometimes it looks like frustration, overthinking, or even withdrawal. If he thinks showing his fear will make him look weak, he might bury it under silence or distance. He might pretend he's fine while quietly pulling back, convinced that if he cares less, it won't hurt as much if you leave. But underneath that is the same root, the thought that he could lose you and the uncertainty of what that would do to him. When fear starts to shape a man's actions, you'll often notice a change in pace. He may want more closeness, more reassurance, more proof that you're as committed as he is. Or he may start testing you, intentionally or not, to see if you'll stick around when things aren't perfect. In his mind, it's about self-protection. In reality, it's a slow erosion of trust, not because you've done anything wrong, but because fear has taken the wheel instead of love. One of the hardest parts about this dynamic is that fear often makes people act in ways that create the very outcome they're trying to avoid. If he becomes clingy, it can make you feel smothered. If he becomes distant, it can make you feel unimportant. Both reactions over time chip away at the connection. And because the fear is rooted in a deep emotional truth, I care about you so much that the thought of losing you feels unbearable. It can be hard for him to see that his actions are actually creating the conditions for loss. The way through this isn't to remove the fear completely. That's not realistic. Caring deeply about someone will always carry the risk of losing them. The work is in learning how to let love, not fear, guide the response to that risk. For him, that means being honest about what he's feeling before it turns into behavior that damages trust. It means saying, I'm feeling a little insecure right now, instead of trying to control the situation. It means being willing to sit in the discomfort of uncertainty instead of trying to solve it by holding tighter. And for you, if you're on the receiving end of that fear, it means seeing the vulnerability underneath the reaction. It doesn't mean excusing unhealthy behavior or ignoring your own boundaries, but it does mean recognizing that what might feel like unnecessary questions, distance, or tension is often a signal of care tangled up with anxiety. Sometimes that perspective alone can keep both people from slipping into patterns of misunderstanding. Fear of loss can also be a sign that the relationship matters in a way nothing else has. For some men, it's the first time they've cared enough to feel that afraid. And while that's uncomfortable, it's also an opportunity, a chance to learn how to care deeply without letting that care turn into control. The men who navigate this well are the ones who use their fear as a reminder to keep showing up in healthy, steady ways, instead of as a reason to monitor, test, or protect themselves from hurt by holding back. Over time, when the relationship is met with consistency and understanding, that fear softens. It doesn't go away. The stakes will always be high when you love someone, but it becomes less of a driver and more of a quiet reminder. This matters to me. I need to treat it with care. That's when his actions stop being shaped by the thought of losing you and start being shaped by the desire to grow with you. It's the difference between protecting the connection out of fear and protecting it out of love. One pulls everything tight. The other leaves room for both people to breathe. The truth is, when a man fears losing you, it's because you've reached a place in his life that not everyone gets to. You've become part of his sense of home, his anchor, the person who makes the world feel more steady. That's not something he gives lightly. And if he can learn to let that fear be a signal to value the relationship instead of a warning to guard himself or grip too hard, then it becomes a force that strengthens instead of strains. That's when the fear of losing you transforms into the commitment to keep choosing you every day in ways you can actually feel. It's rarely the grand gestures that tell you how someone really feels about you. More often, it's the smallest shifts, the little changes in rhythm that almost slip by unnoticed, that end up carrying the most weight. They don't come with fanfare or an announcement. They show up in the way his tone softens when he speaks to you after a long day. in the way he stays a little longer in the room before leaving for work, in the way he starts to remember the details you thought were too small for anyone else to notice. Those little shifts are his way of letting you in without saying the words out loud. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss them because they rarely come in the form you expect. Sometimes it starts with presence. Before, his phone might have been in his hand more than his eyes were on you. But now, it's turned over on the table when you talk. His focus lingers longer. He's not rushing the conversation. There's a pause before he responds, not because he's distracted, but because he's actually considering what you've said. That pause is not empty space. It's a sign of care. It's him making room for you, your thoughts and your feelings, and that shift, as small as it might seem, is a bridge being built. You notice it in the way he starts asking about your day, not as a polite routine, but with genuine follow-up. He remembers that you had a meeting you were nervous about and asks how it went. He remembers the name of your friend you haven't seen in a while and checks if you've reconnected. These are not dramatic changes, but they show that your world is becoming part of his mental landscape. When someone starts making room for your life inside theirs, even in these tiny ways, it's not nothing. It's the start of a deeper weaving together. There's also the shift in how he handles disagreement. Before, maybe frustration made him quick to shut down or change the subject. But now, even when he's uncomfortable, he stays in the conversation a little longer. He listens without interrupting as much. He might still be figuring out how to do it well, but there's an effort to not retreat so quickly. That's not just patience. That's trust. Trust that you can handle what's hard together. Trust that the connection is strong enough to survive discomfort. The smallest shifts often show up in timing. The late night texts turn into earlier calls, not because romance is fading, but because he wants to catch you while you're still awake. The quick goodbyes stretch into a few more minutes in the doorway. The "I'll let you know" turns into a more certain "I'll be there." He's not necessarily becoming more romantic in obvious ways. He's becoming more reliable. And reliability may not look exciting on the surface, but in the language of love, it's one of the most powerful commitments there is. You might notice he's starting to share a little more of himself without being prompted. Maybe it's a memory from childhood he's never mentioned before, or an insecurity he used to keep under lock and key. He's letting you see the corners of him that aren't polished, the parts that aren't designed to impress you. That's a big shift disguised as a small moment, because the willingness to be seen fully, without the armor, is one of the clearest signs that someone feels safe with you. And safety shows in the way he stops performing. In the beginning, people often give you the version of themselves they think you'll like. Over time, if the relationship is real, those versions melt away. The way he sits around you, relaxed instead of poised, says more than any love letter. The comfort in silence, the unhurried breathing when you're next to each other, the absence of pressure to fill every gap with words, those are all signs that his guard has lowered. Sometimes the shift is physical, but not in the way people usually think. It's not about touch with an agenda. It's the way his hand rests on your back in a crowded room to make sure you're with him. The way he angles his body toward you when you're sitting together. The way he stands closer in a conversation without even realizing it. Our bodies often speak what our mouths won't, and these small, unconscious movements say, "You're important. You're mine. I want you here." There's also a quiet consistency in the way he starts to factor you into his future plans, not the big someday conversations, but the small, everyday logistics. He'll say, "We should try that place next week." Instead of "I want to go there," he shifts from "I" to "what" without thinking about it. That's not a slip of the tongue. That's the slow rewiring of how he sees his life, not as a solo journey, but as one that's shared. And perhaps the most telling shift of all is when his care for you shows up in ways that don't benefit him. When he does something just to make your day lighter without it being part of a trade or a promise. When he listens to the same story twice because you needed to tell it again. When he gives you the better seat, the last bite, the softer blanket. Those moments might pass in seconds, but they reveal a deeper truth. Love often speaks loudest in the quietest ways. The truth is, the small shifts are easy to miss because we're taught to look for the grand moments. But in real connection, it's rarely the big declarations that hold the relationship together. It's the everyday choices, the subtle adjustments, the little ways someone says, "I'm here," without having to say it at all. These changes might not make headlines in your mind, but they should, because they are often the proof you've been searching for.